TV soap news and spoilers say that the neon lights of Lakeview Casino flickered like a dying star, casting a sickly glow over the cracked pavement of the parking lot. It was here, in this seedy underbelly of a once glamorous town, that Doug's story took a turn so sharp it would leave everyone questioning what was real and what was a carefully crafted illusion. The air was thick with the stench of stale beer and desperation, and Doug, a man already teetering on the edge of ruin, found himself at the heart of a conspiracy that would unravel the lives of those around him. Was Doug truly dead, as the world believed, or had he slipped through the cracks of fate, orchestrating his own disappearance with the help of his loyal friend Randy? To understand this twisted tale, we must dive deep into the events leading up to that fateful night, peeling back the layers of deceit, betrayal, and vengeance that define Beyond the Gates. A man on the edge. Doug was no stranger to hardship. Once a man of modest means and quiet dignity, he had fallen far from grace. His days were spent in a haze of cheap whiskey and regret, his nights haunted by the ghosts of past mistakes. His marriage to Vanessa had crumbled under the weight of his alcoholism, their arguments echoing through the thin walls of their run-down apartment like a storm that refused to break. It was during one such argument, a vicious exchange of words that cut deeper than any blade, that Doug made a decision that would set the stage for the mystery to come. In a fit of spite, he stormed out, his prized possession, a tarnished silver watch inherited from his father, clutched tightly in his hand. That watch, a relic of better days, was his last tether to a life he could barely remember. But that night, it became something else, a bargaining chip. At Lakeview Casino, Doug pawned the watch for a handful of chips, his hands trembling as he pushed them across the felt of the blackjack table. The casino was a predatory beast, its glitz and glamour a facade for the despair it fed upon. Doug, however, was no ordinary prey. That night, something shifted. The cards fell in his favor, each hand piling more chips in front of him until the stack gleamed like a small fortune. For the first time in years, Doug felt alive, the weight of his failures momentarily lifted by the thrill of victory. But victory, in a place like Lakeview, comes at a price. Enter Marcel, the casino's enforcer, a man whose smile was as cold as the steel of the gun he kept tucked in his waistband. Marcel approached Doug with the practiced ease of a predator circling its kill. "You don't need this money where you're going," he said, his voice low and menacing, as he confiscated Doug's winnings. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, their meaning cryptic yet chilling. Doug, too stunned to protest, watched as his brief moment of triumph was stripped away. Hours later, the world would learn of his fate. A car accident, a fiery wreck attributed to drunk driving. Doug, they said, was dead. A death too convenient. The news of Doug's death spread through the town like wildfire, each retelling more tragic than the last. A drunkard, they whispered, who had finally met the end he'd been chasing for years. The police report was damning, a blood alcohol level far beyond the legal limit, a car wrapped around a tree, and a body burned beyond recognition. It was a neat, tidy story, one that tied up loose ends and left no room for questions. But for those who knew Doug, it was too neat, too tidy. Something didn't add up. Vanessa, Doug's estranged wife, was among the first to question the narrative. Their marriage had been a battlefield, but beneath the anger and hurt, there was still a flicker of love, or at least loyalty. When she heard of Doug's death, her grief was laced with suspicion. She knew Doug's habits, his patterns, his demons. He was reckless, yes, but he wasn't suicidal. And the timing of the accident, mere hours after his confrontation with Marcel, felt like more than a coincidence. Vanessa's mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Had Doug been targeted? And if so, why? Her suspicions led her to Joey, a man whose name had long been a thorn in Doug's side. Joey was a figure of influence in the town, a charismatic manipulator who hid his ruthlessness behind a veneer of charm. Doug and Joey's relationship had been strained for years, a feud rooted in a shared history that neither spoke of openly. But Vanessa knew the truth, or at least part of it. Doug had been threatening to expose Joey's involvement in a crime that had shaken the town, the murder of Kenny, a small-time crook whose death had been swept under the rug years ago. Kenny's death was officially ruled an accident, but Doug had claimed to have evidence that pointed to Joey's guilt. It was a dangerous accusation, one that could have cost Joey everything. Vanessa confronted Joey at his upscale office, the walls lined with accolades that seemed to mock the truth. "Did you have something to do with this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. Joey leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Vanessa, you're grieving. I get it. But I had nothing to do with Doug's accident. He was a drunk. He made his own choices." His denial was firm, polished, almost rehearsed. But Vanessa saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief crack in his facade that betrayed something deeper. She left the office with more questions than answers, her heart pounding with the certainty that Joey was hiding something. The shadow of doubt. As the days turned into weeks, the town settled into an uneasy acceptance of Doug's death. But for a select few, the shadow of doubt grew longer. Among them was Randy, Doug's best friend and a man who had never trusted Joey. Randy was a rough-around-the-edges mechanic, his hands perpetually stained with grease, his loyalty to Doug unwavering. He and Doug had been through too much together, bar fights, late-night confessions, and dreams of escaping the town's suffocating grip. If anyone knew Doug's secrets, it was Randy. And if anyone had the motive to help Doug pull off a disappearing act, it was him. Randy had never hidden his disdain for Joey. The two men were polar opposites, Joey, the smooth-talking opportunist who clawed his way to power, Randy, the working-class rebel who saw through the lies. Randy had been there the night Doug pawned his watch, had watched from the sidelines as Marcel swooped in to claim the winnings. He'd heard the cryptic threat, seen the fear in Doug's eyes. And when the news of the accident broke, Randy's first instinct wasn't grief, it was suspicion. What if Doug wasn't dead? The thought took root in Randy's mind, a seed of hope in a field of despair. The accident had been too perfect, the body too conveniently destroyed. Doug was no stranger to trouble, but he was also resourceful, cunning when he needed to be. Could he have faked his death, slipping away into the night with Randy's help? The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. Randy knew the town's underbelly, its hidden corners where a man could disappear if he knew the right people. And Doug had something worth running from, the truth about Kenny's murder, a truth that could bring Joey down. The plan unfolds. Let's imagine, for a moment, that Doug's death was a carefully orchestrated ruse. Picture Doug, shaken by Marcel's threat by the casino, realizing that his life was in danger. He knew Joey's reach, knew the lengths he'd go to protect his secrets. Doug wasn't a fool, he'd seen what happened to Kenny, a man who'd crossed Joey and paid the ultimate price. But Doug also had an ace up his sleeve, Randy. In the hours before the so-called accident, Doug and Randy could have met in secret, perhaps in the back of Randy's garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. Doug, his voice low and urgent, would have laid out the situation. Joey's men were closing in, and the casino incident was a warning. "I need to disappear," Doug might have said, his eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting Joey's enforcers to burst through the door. Randy, ever the loyal friend, would have nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. The plan would have been audacious but simple. Doug needed a body, a car, and a story. The body was the trickiest part, but Lakeview had no shortage of unclaimed souls, drifters, addicts, men whose deaths would go unnoticed. With Randy's connections in the town's underbelly, they could have acquired a corpse, dressing it in Doug's clothes and placing it in the driver's seat of a stolen car. The crash itself would have been staged with meticulous care, a remote stretch of road, a bottle of whiskey to douse the scene, and a match to set it ablaze. The fire would do the rest, erasing any chance of identification. Randy's role would have been crucial. As a mechanic, he had the skills to tamper with the car, ensuring it would burn hot and fast. He could have planted evidence, Doug's wallet, his keys, to seal the illusion. And when the police arrived, they'd see exactly what they were meant to see, a drunk driver who'd met a tragic end. The town would mourn, Vanessa would grieve, and Joey would believe his problem was solved. Meanwhile, Doug would slip away, perhaps to a neighboring state, a new identity waiting in the wings. The ripple effect. As weeks turned into months, the ripples of Doug's supposed death continued to spread. Vanessa, unable to shake her suspicions, began digging into Joey's past, piecing together clues about Kenny's murder. She found old newspaper clippings, cryptic notes Doug had left behind, and whispers from those who'd known Kenny. Each discovery brought her closer to the truth, and closer to danger. Joey, sensing her probing, tightened his grip on the town, his paranoia growing with each passing day. Randy, meanwhile, played his part perfectly. To the world, he was the grieving friend, drowning his sorrow in cheap beer at the local dive bar. But in private, he was Doug's lifeline, sending coded messages to a burner phone hidden in a lockbox. Doug, wherever he was biding his time, waiting for the moment to strike. The truth about Kenny's murder was his weapon, and he intended to use it to bring Joey down once and for all. But the plan wasn't without flaws. Vanessa's investigation was drawing attention, and Joey's men were watching her closely. If she got too close to the truth, she could unravel everything, putting Doug's life, and Randy's, in jeopardy. And then there was the question of Marcel, the enforcer whose role in the casino incident remained a mystery. Was he acting on Joey's orders, or was he a rogue player with his own agenda? The deeper one looked, the more tangled the web became. The return of Doug. Imagine, now, a stormy night months later, the kind of night where the rain seems to wash away the sins of the world. Vanessa, alone in her apartment, hears a knock at the door. Her heart races as she opens it, expecting another of Joey's veiled threats. Instead, she finds Doug, soaked to the bone, his face gaunt but alive. The reunion is anything but joyful. Anger, betrayal, and relief collide in a torrent of emotions. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demands, tears streaming down her face. Doug's answer is simple: "I had to protect you." Doug's return would be the spark that ignites the final act. With Randy's help, he'd have gathered enough evidence to expose Joey's crimes, not just Kenny's murder, but a web of corruption that stretched through the town like a cancer. The confrontation would be dramatic, a showdown in the heart of Lakeview Casino, where it all began. Joey, cornered and desperate, would lash out, but Doug, no longer the broken man he once was, would stand his ground. The truth would come out, and Joey's empire would crumble. A tale of survival. In the end, Beyond the Gates is a story of survival, of a man who refused to let his enemies define his fate. Doug's journey, from a drunken pawn to a mastermind of his own destiny, is a testament to the power of resilience and friendship. Randy's loyalty, Vanessa's courage, and Doug's cunning weave together to create a narrative that is as thrilling as it is heartbreaking. Whether Doug truly faked his death or met his end in that fiery wreck, one thing is certain: the truth will always find a way to surface, no matter how deep it's buried. As the neon lights of Lakeview Casino continue to flicker, they cast long shadows over a town forever changed. Doug's story is a reminder that in a world of lies, the greatest rebellion is to live, and to fight for what's right.